When I was cleaning out Dad's workshop, I never thought I'd come across the letter that would destroy my family, but there it was, in his metal toolbox, between old receipts and warranty cards. My name written in his distinctive scroll across a sealed envelope. Before 3 weeks ago, I believed I knew the dynamics of the Malone family I had married into. My name is Harper. As soon as I read my father-in-law, Frank's final words to me, that comprehension fell apart. Sitting on his old workbench, I'd brushed sawdust off my jeans and mumbled, I should have done this years ago. As I read it, the letter shuddered in my hands. If you're reading this, Harper, know that I'm leaving and that you must be resilient for what is ahead. My wife, Maddie, will attempt to assert authority. It's different this time, but she always has. She will manipulate Ethan because she fears being by herself. Don't allow her to ruin the things you and my son have created. Keep an eye on them both. The only person who can save this family right now is you. Love, Dad. I resisted crying as the paper crumpled in my hands. Only 2 weeks after Frank's death, his prophecies were already coming to pass. Maddie had been contacting Ethan at all hours, stopping by every day, and commenting on how lonely her house felt. Harper, you still in there? Ethan's voice echoed through the garage. I quickly folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. Yeah, just finishing up. I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his dark hair disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit he picked up since his father's death. Mom's here, he said. She wants to talk to us about something important. Of course she was. She always seemed to show up when I was trying to process things. I'll be right there, I said, forcing a smile. Inside, Maggie sat at our kitchen table, perfectly put together as always, in her cream blouse and pearl earrings. The only sign of her supposed grief was the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her teacup. Harper, dear, she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes sharp. I've been thinking about what's best for everyone, and I simply can't stay in that big house all alone. My stomach dropped. I glanced at Ethan, who was studying the floor tiles like they held the secrets of the universe. I'd decided to sell the house, Maddie continued, and I thought, wouldn't it be lovely if I moved in here? Just temporarily, of course. The word temporarily hung in the air like a storm cloud. Frank's letter burned in my pocket. Mom, Ethan started, finally looking up. That's a big decision. Maybe we should take some time to... Oh, darling, Maggie interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. Your father would have wanted us to stay together as a family. You wouldn't want me rattling around in that empty house all by myself, would you? I watched my husband's resolve crumble under his mother's practiced guilt trip. No, of course not, he mumbled. Excellent. Maddie brightened immediately. Jenna's already offered to help me pack. We can start moving things this weekend. As Maggie laid out her plans, I felt the walls of my home, my safe space, beginning to close in. Frank's words echoed in my mind. Watch over them both. But how could I protect my marriage when the threat was coming to live under our roof? Later that night, as I lay awake listening to Ethan's steady breathing, I pulled out Frank's letter again in the dim light from the window. One line stood out. You're the only one who can keep this family together now. I just wished he told me how. It took exactly 3 days for my life to become a carefully choreographed dance around Maddie's feelings. I'd wake up early to work in my home office, only to find her already in the kitchen, rearranging my cabinets, because that's how Ethan grew up with them. I'd been staring at my computer screen for an hour, trying to focus on a client's logo design, when the sound of Maddie's voice drifted through the walls again. "Ethan, darling, the guest room is just so stuffy. Perhaps we could move me into the office. Harper could work at the kitchen table. She's always saying she needs to get out more." I yanked my headphones off just as Ethan's reply came, too soft to hear. Classic Ethan, probably mumbling some non-committal response. The front door clicked shut. He was leaving for work, escaping the tension, while I remained trapped in it. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson next door. "Coffee? Your mother-in-law is reorganizing your front garden again." I found Maggie on her knees in my carefully planned herb garden, pulling up the lavender I'd planted last spring. My lavender, the ones Frank had helped me choose. "Oh, Harper." Maggie looked up, soil staining her expensive gardening gloves. "I hope you don't mind. These were all wrong for this spot. I'm putting in roses instead. Ethan's always loved roses." My fingers curled into fists. "Actually, Maggie, I do mind." "That lavender was Jenna," Maddie called out, cutting me off as her daughter appeared in the driveway. "Perfect timing. Help me with these plants, dear." Jenna sauntered over, designer sunglasses perched on her head. "Sorry, Mom, just stopping by to grab those papers you mentioned." I watched them exchange a look that made my skin crawl. "What papers?" "Oh, nothing important." Maggie waved dismissively. "Just some things your father left behind. Jenna Harper, would you be a dear and make us some tea? In my own house, in my own garden." I turned without a word and went inside. But instead of heading to the kitchen, I slipped into the garage. Something about their exchange fell off, and Frank's letter had taught me to trust my instincts. I pressed my ear to the door leading to the garden. "The house should sell quickly," Jenna was saying. "The market's hot right now. Perfect. Once it's sold, we can." Maddie's voice dropped lower. "But what about Harper?" Jenna asked. "She's not going to like it," Maddie replied sharply. "Harper doesn't need to concern herself with family matters." I pushed away from the door, my hands shaking. Family matters? I was family. I'd been family for 6 years, but somehow I was still an outsider looking in. That evening, I tried to talk to Ethan about it over dinner. Maddie had gone to her book club, the only 2 hours of peace we got anymore. "I think your mom and Jenna are planning something with the house," I said, pushing my food around my plate. Ethan sighed. "Harper, please. Mom's still grieving. Can we not do this tonight?" "When should we do it then?" "When she's completely taken over our lives." The words burst out before I could stop them. "She's my mother," he said quietly. "What am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to be my husband first." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at his plate, his fork suspended. Before he could respond, the front door opened, and Maddie's voice rang out. "I'm home early. I brought dessert." I stood up so quickly, my chair scraped against the floor. "I need some air." As I walked past Maggie, I caught a glimpse of something falling from her purse. A real estate agent's business card. She snatched it out quickly, but not before I saw the handwritten note on the back. Offer accepted. That night, I lay awake again, Frank's words echoing in my mind. Keep the family together, he'd said. But how could I keep together something that was already breaking apart? I needed proof, and I knew exactly where to look for it. Frank's study at the old house, where he kept everything. Tomorrow, while Maggie was at her hair appointment, I would find out exactly what she and Jenna were planning. I just hoped I was ready for whatever truth I might discover. The key to Frank's study felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as I pulled into the driveway of his, now Maggie's, house. I kept a spare key all these years, using it to water plants when they traveled. Now, I was using it to break in. Technically, my hands trembled as I unlocked the door. The house still smelled like Frank's pipe tobacco and furniture polish. Maggie's hair appointment gave me 2 hours, tops. I made my way to the study, where morning light filtered through dusty blinds. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, except for the filing cabinet. The drawers hung open, papers scattered across the floor. Someone had been searching for something. I started with his desk, rifling through drawers until I found a leather-bound book wedged in the back. Frank's diary. I'd seen him writing in it countless times, usually after family arguments. The first entry I'd opened made my blood run cold. Maggie's done it again, pushed away another of Ethan's girlfriends. Sarah was a sweet girl, but Maggie convinced Ethan she was using him for his money. The real crime. Sarah stood up to Maggie about her constant meddling. I should say something, but footsteps creaked overhead. I froze. Harper's car is outside. Jenna's voice drifted down. Perfect timing, Maggie replied. We need to deal with this now. I scrambled to take photos of the diary pages with my phone, heart pounding. The footsteps grew closer. Harper, Maddie's voice rang out from the hallway. What a surprise to find you here. I shoved the diary back into the drawer and spun around. Maddie stood in the doorway, Jenna hovering behind her, both dressed for lunch. No hair appointment in sight. I gestured vaguely at the mess of papers, helping clean up. How thoughtful. Maddie's smile didn't reach her eyes. Though I do wonder why you didn't ask first. This is my house now, after all. Is it? The words slipped out before I could stop them. You're selling it, aren't you? Without telling Ethan? Jenna stepped forward. It's complicated, Harper. You wouldn't understand. I understand perfectly. I cut her off. You're selling the house and splitting the money, while leaving Maggie to live with us permanently. Did I miss anything? You're upset, Maggie said softly, moving closer. Grief makes us all a bit paranoid sometimes. Why don't we discuss this over tea? Stop it, I snapped. Stop pretending you care about my feelings when you're plotting behind my back, behind your own son's back. Everything I do is for Ethan. Maggie's voice hardened. He needs his family clothes. He needs his mother. You're just temporary. The word hit like a slap. We've been married for 6 years, and I've been his mother for 34. Maddie smiled. Who do you think he'll choose when he finds out you've been sneaking around, going through his dead father's things? My phone felt heavy in my pocket. The diary photos my only proof. But Maggie was right. Ethan would hate that I'd come here without telling him. You can't manipulate people forever, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Frank saw right through you. Warned you. Maddie's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I'd said too much. Nothing. I should go. Show me, Maggie demanded, blocking the doorway. Show me what Frank gave you. Mom, Jenna touched her arm. Maybe we should stay out of this. Maddie snapped. Well, Harper, what did my husband say about me? I pushed past them both, nearly running for the front door. Behind me, Maggie called out. You can't protect him from me, Harper. Ethan will always choose his family. I am his family. I am his family. I shouted back, but the only response was the sound of my own footsteps on the porch steps, then in my car. Hands shaking on the steering wheel, I pulled out my phone. The diary photos were there, along with Frank's letter, proof of everything. But Maggie was right about one thing. Who would Ethan believe? His grieving mother or his paranoid wife? I started the car, Frank's words echoing in my head. Watch over them both. I just hadn't realized how much I'd be risking to do it. I sat in my car outside Mrs. Patterson's house for 20 minutes, clutching my phone with the diary photos, before I finally worked up the courage to go inside. She opened the door before I could knock, concern etched on her face. "I saw what happened at the house," she said, ushering me in. "That woman's been trouble since the day Frank married her." The familiar scent of coffee and cinnamon filled her kitchen, a stark contrast to the tension suffocating my own home. "You knew Frank before Maggie?" I asked. 30 years of watching that family," Mrs. Patterson said, setting 2 mugs on the table. "Frank was a good man who made one bad choice, letting Maggie control everything." My phone buzzed. "Ethan, Mom says you broke into the house. We need to talk." Of course she'd beaten me to it. I switched off my phone. "Show me what you found," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. I pulled up the diary photos. As she read, her expression darkened. "There's more," she said finally. "Frank came to see me the day before he died. He was going to change his will." My coffee went cold as she told me everything. How Frank had discovered Maggie's secret account, filled with money she'd been siphoning from their savings for years. How he planned to protect Ethan's inheritance, but he died before he could sign the new documents. "That's why they're rushing to sell the house," I whispered, "before anyone can look too closely at the finances." The front door chimed. Mrs. Patterson tensed. "That'll be Ethan." I called him. "He what?" "He needs to see this, Harper. All of it." Ethan stood in the doorway, looking exhausted. "Harper, what's going on?" "Mom's crying, saying you're trying to turn everyone against her." "Sit down," Mrs. Patterson commanded. "There's something you need to see." I watched his face as he read the diary entries. As Mrs. Patterson explained about the will, the color drained from his cheeks. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Mom wouldn't." "Check the account numbers in Frank's desk," Mrs. Patterson said. "If you hurry, you might still find the proof before she destroys it." Ethan's phone rang. Maddie's name flashed on the screen. He stared at it, then declined the call. "I need to think," he said, standing abruptly. "I can't. I need time." "Ethan." I reached for him, but he pulled away. "Don't." His voice cracked. "Just don't." After he left, I slumped in my chair. "That went well," I muttered. "Given time." Mrs. Patterson said, "But be careful. Maddie's most dangerous when she's cornered." I drove home slowly, dreading what waited for me, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found. The house was dark except for the kitchen. Maddie sat at the table, Frank's letter, my letter, in her hands. "Looking for this?" she asked softly. "Jenna found it while helping me organize your office." Imagine my surprise. My throat went dry. "That's private." "Private?" She laughed. "This letter is a sad old man's paranoid ramblings. Frank was losing his mind at the end. You know, imagining conspiracies, making wild accusations. He was protecting his family from you. I am his family." She slammed her hand on the table. "Everything I've done has been for this family and you." She stood, letter clenched in her fist. "You're trying to destroy us." "No, I'm trying to save us. All of us." "By turning my son against me? By digging through private papers?" Her voice rose. I won't let you take him from me. I won't let you destroy everything I've built. Everything you've stolen, I said. The words hung between us like smoke. Something shifted in Maggie's eyes, something cold and calculating. You know what your problem is, Harper. You think this is about money, but it's not. She moved closer. It's about power. And you? She pointed at me. You have none. She was right. In this moment, with Ethan doubting everything and Frank's letter in her hands, I had nothing, almost nothing. I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over the diary photos. One click, and I could send them to everyone. Ethan, Jenna, the family lawyer. Maddie's eyes narrowed at the phone. What are you doing? Choosing my family, I said and pressed send. The family dinner was Maddie's idea. Of course it was. To clear the air, she said, as if sending those diary photos hadn't just blown everything wide open. But here we were, seated around our dining room table, the tension thick enough to choke on. Jenna wouldn't meet my eyes. She pushed her food around her plate, shoulders hunched. The diary entries had revealed her role in everything, the secret meetings about the house sale, the planned distribution of Frank's money. This is lovely, Harper, Maddie said, cutting into her chicken with precise movements, though perhaps a touch overdone. I gripped my fork tighter. Ethan hadn't said a word since arriving home, his eyes fixed on some point between his plate and the wall. Did you check the account numbers? I asked quietly. Maddie's knife scraped against the plate. Harper, dear, this isn't the time. Did you check them, Ethan? He finally looked up. Yes. The word hung in the air like smoke. And Jenna's voice cracked. The money's gone, Ethan said. All of it. Transferred out 3 days after Dad died. Maddie set down her utensils with a delicate clink. I can explain. Can you explain the other accounts? Ethan's voice was eerily calm. The ones you've been filling for years with Dad's money. Our money, Maggie corrected. Everything I did was for this family, to protect us. Protect us? I couldn't hold back anymore. You stole from your husband, manipulated your children, and tried to destroy my marriage. How is that protection? You don't understand what it takes to keep a family together, Maggie snapped. Frank was weak. He would have given everything away, left us with nothing. I had to act. He was trying to stop you, I said. He knew what you were doing. He knew nothing. Maggie's fist hit the table, making the glasses jump. He was a fool who trusted everyone, who never understood that love isn't enough. Power keeps families together. Control. Mom, Jenna whispered. Stop. No. Let her finish, Ethan said. Let's hear how. With these ridiculous accusations. They're not accusations when we have proof. I cut in. The diary, the accounts, the house sale you tried to hide. Enough. Maddie stood, her chair scraping back. I won't sit here and be attacked in my own home. This isn't your home, I said, standing to face her. And we're not your puppets anymore. Maddie's voice wavered. Are you going to let her speak to me this way? The moment stretched, like glass about to shatter. Ethan looked at his mother, then at me, then back at his plate. Dad knew, he said finally. He knew what you were doing, and he tried to stop you. He hesitated, his voice catching. And you let me blame Harper. You made me think she was paranoid, jealous, when all along I was protecting you. Maddie insisted everything I did was for us. For yourself, Ethan finished. He stood slowly. Pack your things, Mom. Tonight. The color drained from Maddie's face. You can't mean that. I'm your mother. And I'm your son. Ethan's voice shook, but his eyes were steady. Not your possession. It's over. Maggie turned to Jenna, who shrank back. Jenna, tell them. Tell them why we needed the money. But Jenna stood, gathering her purse. I'm sorry, Mom. I can't do this anymore. As Jenna fled, Maddie's facade finally cracked. You'll regret this, she hissed. All of you, when you realize what family really means. We already know, I said quietly. Frank showed us. And it's nothing like what you've done. Maggie straightened, smoothing her shirt with trembling hands. This isn't over, she said before turning and walking stiffly toward the guest room. In the sudden silence, I felt Ethan's hand find mine under the table. His grip was tight, desperate. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have seen it sooner. I squeezed his hand back, but something in me knew Maggie was right about one thing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. From upstairs came the sound of drawers slamming, and I wondered what else Maddie might have hidden away, waiting to be discovered. The morning after Maggie left, I found her pearl earrings on the guest room nightstand. A calculated move. She'd never forget jewelry, especially not pieces Frank had given her. I was still staring at them when Ethan's phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the message. She's at the hospital, he said. Apparently, she collapsed at her hotel. My stomach clenched. It's another manipulation. Probably. He grabbed his keys anyway. But what if it's not? I watched him leave, the pearls cold in my palm. Even gone, she was pulling his strings. The house felt empty and too full at the same time. I started cleaning the guest room, trying to erase Maggie's presence when I found the first document. Then another, and another. Bank statements, insurance policies, legal papers. My hands shook as I read them. Frank hadn't just been planning to change his will. He'd already started transferring assets, protecting them from Maggie. But he died before finishing, leaving everything vulnerable. The doorbell rang. Jenna stood there, looking smaller somehow without Maggie's shadow behind her. Is it true? She asked. About Mom? The hospital? Yes, I said quietly, letting her inside. She was wringing her hands. What about Dad's money? The transfers? I showed her the papers. You didn't know. I knew about Mom's accounts, but not. She sank onto the couch. She told me Dad was trying to cut us all off, that we had to protect ourselves. And you believed her? She's my mother. Jenna's voice cracked. What else was I supposed to do? My phone buzzed. Ethan, she's being admitted. They found pills in her purse. Jesus, Jenna whispered, reading over my shoulder. You don't think she'd? Another text. She's asking for you. Of course she was. The hospital corridor seemed endless. Each step felt like walking into a trap, but I couldn't turn back, not with Ethan waiting, hope and fear warring in his eyes. Maggie looked small in the hospital bed, her makeup perfectly applied despite everything, always keeping up appearances. Harper, she said softly, you came. I knew I would. Did you find them? The papers? I stiffened. You left them for me to find. Frank was going to destroy us, she whispered. Break apart everything I built. I couldn't let that happen. You did that yourself. Did I? She smiled faintly. Look around, Harper. My children are here, worried about their mother. Family always comes first. Blood always wins. This isn't winning, Maggie. This is desperation. Is it? Her voice hardened. I've already spoken to my lawyer. Those transfers Frank made, illegal, without my consent. And now, with my fragile mental state clearly documented, who do you think they'll believe? The grieving widow or the daughter-in-law who's been causing so much stress? The trap snapped shut. She planned this perfectly. The papers, the hospital, everything orchestrated to make me look like the villain. You destroy your own son's marriage to keep control. I'm protecting him from you, she said, reaching for the call button. Now, I'm feeling rather tired. All this stress. In the hallway, Ethan and Jenna waited anxiously. How is she? Jenna asked. I opened my mouth to expose Maddie's scheme, but stopped. They looked so worried, so desperate to believe their mother wasn't a monster. Telling them would only prove Maggie right. That blood comes first. She needs rest, I said instead. Ethan squeezed my hand. Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy. If he only knew. I'd walked right into Maggie's web, and now I was trapped. Fight back, and I'd look like the unstable one, destroying the family. Stay quiet, and watch her take everything. The money, the house, maybe even my marriage. Frank's letter felt heavy in my pocket, his warning too late. I thought I was protecting the family, but Maggie had been playing a longer game all along. As we left the hospital, I caught her watching from the window, her smile reflected in the glass. She'd won this round, but the game wasn't over. Not yet. The last place I expected to find answers was in Frank's garden. But there I was, pulling weeds from around his prized roses when my trowel hit something solid. A metal box, weathered but intact, with "For Maggie" etched on the lid. Inside was a letter, different from mine. The paper was newer, the ink fresher. Frank's last message to his wife. I was still reading when Maggie's shadow fell across the page. That's private. Her voice was sharp, despite her supposed fragility. She'd been released from the hospital yesterday, like the financial records were private. I stood letter in hand. Frank's attempts to protect his children from you. Give me the letter, Harper, she said. He knew, I said. Not just about the money, about everything. The manipulation, the control, the fear you use to keep everyone in line. Maddie stepped closer. You have no idea. What it takes to keep a family together, neither do you. That's what Frank was trying to tell you. I held up the letter. He loved you, but he saw what you've become, what you were doing to your children. Don't you dare presume to know my husband's mind, she spat. I don't have to. He wrote it all down. I started reading aloud. Maggie, my love, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll be alone, truly alone, unless you learn to let go. Her voice cracked. Stop. Our children aren't possessions. Love isn't control. I've watched you tighten your grip year after year, telling yourself it was for their own good. But all you've done is teach them that love hurts. Stop, she cried, lunging for the letter, but I stepped back. I'm protecting them now, in death, as I should have in life. The money doesn't matter. What matters is breaking the cycle before you destroy everything we built. Maddie's facade crumbled. He had no right to judge me, to try to take my family. They were never yours to take. The words exploded out of me. They're people, Maggie. Your children, not chess pieces in your game of control. Everything I did was for them, she shouted. Everything you did was for yourself. I countered, holding out the letter. Frank knew that. He loved you enough to tell you the truth, even if it meant you'd hate him for it. She took the letter with trembling hands. You don't understand. Without control, without them needing me, they'll always need you. They'll always love you. But not like this, I interrupted. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Ethan and Jenna stood at the garden gate, watching us. Mom? Jenna's voice was small. What's going on? Maggie straightened, instinctively reaching for her usual mask of control, but something in Frank's letter had cracked her foundation. She looked at her children, then back at the letter. I don't know how to be any other way. Then learn, Ethan said quietly, with us, but no more manipulation. No more control. You'll leave me. The fear in her voice was raw, real. We're already leaving. Jenna stepped forward. Can't you see that? Your control isn't keeping us close. It's pushing us away. Maggie sank onto the garden bench, Frank's letter crushed in her grip. For the first time, I saw her as she really was. Not the manipulative monster I'd built up in my mind, but a frightened woman who'd confused control for love for so long she couldn't tell the difference anymore. Frank knew, I said softly. That's why he left these letters. Not to punish you, but to save all of us. I don't know how to let go, Maggie whispered. Start by telling the truth, Ethan said. All of it. She looked up at her children, then at me. The mask was gone, leaving only raw vulnerability behind. The truth, she repeated, smoothing Frank's letter with shaking hands. Yes, I suppose it's time. As she began to speak, I watched the roses Frank had planted sway in the breeze. He'd known this moment would come, known that truth, like his beloved flowers, needed both sunshine and rain to grow. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted, and in Frank's garden, surrounded by his legacy of love, we took the first steps toward healing. 6 months after finding Frank's last letter, I stood in his garden again. The roses were blooming despite everything, maybe because of everything. Maggie's therapy sessions had become weekly rituals, followed by careful conversations over coffee. Not in our house. We all agreed those boundaries needed to stay firm, but in neutral territory, where the weight of history felt lighter. The roses need pruning, Maggie said, joining me by the flower beds. She didn't try to take over, didn't reach for the shears. Progress, I said. I know, she replied. We weren't just talking about flowers. Frank would be proud of all of us. The front door opened, and Ethan emerged with boxes. The house was finally being packed up, not for a quick sale, but for new beginnings. Jenna had decided to move in, to make it her home, while Maggie transitioned to a smaller place nearby. Mom, Ethan called out, we found your old photo albums. Where do you want them? You keep them, she said, then caught herself. Unless you don't want to. The hesitation was new, the asking instead of telling. Small steps. We'll make copies, I offered. Everyone should have their own. Jenna appeared with more boxes, pausing to survey the garden. Remember when Dad used to hide Easter eggs out here? You get so mad about the grass getting trampled. I suppose I was rather particular about things, Maggie said, her voice softening. Particular is one word for it, Jenna said, but there was humor in her tone now, not bitterness. As they shared memories, I slipped away to the back corner of the garden where Frank's tool shed stood. We'd been clearing it out all morning, but something had caught my eye. A loose board near the workbench. Behind it, I found one last letter, not to Maggie or to me, but to all of us. Found something? Ethan asked, appearing in the doorway. I showed him the envelope. Soon, we were all gathered in the garden around the bench where everything had changed 6 months ago. To my family, if you're reading this, you've either finally cleaned the shed, about time, or you've learned what I always knew, that love is stronger than fear, truth more powerful than control. Maggie, my dear, I hope you've discovered that letting go doesn't mean being alone. Harper, protecting the family doesn't mean fighting their battles, but helping them find their own strength. Ethan, Jenna, your lives are your own, but that doesn't mean you can't share them with those you love. The garden will always need tending, just like family. But remember, the most beautiful roses grow not from force, but from care, patience, and the courage to let them bloom in their own way. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. And when in doubt, remember, love doesn't control, it liberates. All my love, Frank. Silence fell, broken only by the rustle of leaves and distant wind chimes. He always did know what to say, Maggie whispered, wiping her eyes. Even when we didn't want to hear it, Ethan added, squeezing my hand. We spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through boxes, sharing stories, and learning the delicate art of being family without the chains of control. It wasn't perfect. Maggie still struggled with boundaries. Jenna was learning to trust again. Ethan sometimes caught himself trying to please everyone, but as I watched them together, I realized Frank had been right all along. Protection wasn't about fighting battles or keeping secrets. It was about creating space for truth to bloom, for healing to take root. Later, as Ethan and I headed home, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. Maggie, in the garden, not directing or controlling, but simply tending to the roses she'd once used as weapons of manipulation. Now they were just flowers, beautiful in their simplicity. Ready? Inquired Ethan. I pondered Frank's letters, conflicts fought and injuries recovered, and the distinction between enforcing and releasing love. Yes, I said, I think we all are. Tomorrow, the garden would need to be tended, both tomorrow and the following day. However, we now know that the most significant growth occurs as a result of the storms rather than in spite of them.